You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property under laws they had no part in making.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kalmen.
This is episode 314 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. Joining me on today's show is Kalmen Barkin. He is a libertarian who's published articles at the Libertarian Institute. He's now based in New Hampshire and spent a significant amount of time in Israel before becoming a libertarian. I have Kalmen on the show today to talk a little bit about an article he wrote over a month ago at the Libertarian Institute. Is Netanyahu going to finally lose power? Does it even matter? And then that, and just more update information on what's going on with Israeli politics. It's really something I haven't kept up with on the show, but it does seem pretty important to me. So, Kalmen, welcome to the show. Hope you're doing well and ready to talk about some of this stuff.
I am, and yeah, let's get going.
All right. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is just to kind of define who the frontrunners are. My audience will probably be familiar with, Bibi Netanyahu a little bit more, and at least the name Gantz. But other than that, I haven't talked about these guys in a whole lot of detail on the show. So who are they? What parties do they represent? And we'll just start there.
All right. So everybody knows Bibi Netanyahu. He is the current prime minister of Israel, has been, I think, since the late Bush or early Obama years. Very powerful guy, very capable politician. He represents the Likud party. Likud party is one of the original OG parties of Israel. It was called Cherut at the beginning, which means freedom. It's always been a right-wing, somewhat more libertarian in economics than the other parties. It bills itself as a nationalist liberal party, liberal in the European sense. The country was originally founded by basically communists, and it was the more liberal alternative. When they took power in the late 70s, they brought in, they liberalized a lot of the economy, allowed all kinds of, they actually. Before then, in some parts of the economy are still that way, are completely Soviet. Like a lot of the agriculture has production quotas, exactly how much the economy is allowed to make, planned. And they went and liberalized a lot of the economy. But they're also obviously on the hard right on all national issues. They took power in '77. They've basically held power ever since. They lost 2 elections since 1977. Up against them is this brand new party, Benny Gantz, who's leading this brand new party called Kahol Lavan, or Blue and White. This party is new, brand new, in fact, but it's a conglomeration of basically everyone from the center right to the center left who really doesn't like Bibi. It's run by 4 main characters. Benny Gantz, who was chief of staff of the military, was running the show up until pretty recently. There's a law in Israel: you can't enter politics until 3 years after you're out of one of these high-level military or deep state jobs. And pretty much as soon as his period of what they call cooling ran out, he entered politics to challenge Bibi. He's the leader of the party, the candidate for prime minister. His number 2 is a fellow by the name of Yair Lapid. Yair Lapid is a lifelong journalist. He was the biggest anchorman on TV. Entered politics 2 terms ago. Considered somewhat center-left. He's sort of a centrist. He ran one term. He ran on sticking it to the religious factors and and drafting them and making sure they don't take too much funding. The next time he just ran on more general some economic stuff, and now he joined up to run with them. The third fellow is a guy by the name of Moshe Boogie Alon. Boogie is the nickname. He was also a former IDF chief of staff. He was actually at the beginning of the last term defense minister on behalf of the Netanyahu government. He quit over. He was sort of fired, and that he was fired from his defense minister position, and then quit the party and the Knesset altogether over the incident. I don't know if you remember where a soldier killed a wounded Palestinian attacker in Hebron about 4 years ago.
Right, yeah, I've actually covered this story in some detail on the show. This is the guy that gets sentenced to 16 months, and then that gets reduced to 9 months. And there's some outcry in Israel against him being convicted of this murder at all, right?
Yeah, I'd say if I had to point to a spot, that's one of the times, one of probably two major incidents where sort of the social media, internet world played a huge role in Israeli politics, sort of took over politics, where right away, the official brass came out and condemned him, and Moshe Alon and even Netanyahu himself came out, and then social media completely came out in support of this guy, and then the polling came out that 80% supported him, and so Netanyahu backed off and said that he understands and blah blah blah. And this Yalon fellow refused to join Netanyahu in sort of backing this guy, and Netanyahu basically canned him over that. And then he left politics, been talking about how he thinks Netanyahu went off the deep end, and I'm somewhat in the center right, blah blah blah, but we don't kill people on the street, and we're not going to stand for that kind of thing. He actually grew up in the left. He grew up in the kibbutz. Then, when he got older, after in the military, he flipped over to the right. He decided that there's not going to be a political solution to the conflict and to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And basically, his belief is it's going to stay as is, and we should strive for it to stay the status quo for as long as we can. Maybe in 100 years there'll be a solution. So he's definitely on the right, but he's very into that. You got to be humane, and you can occupy people forever, but you can't shoot them in the street. And then the fourth fellow is a fellow by the name of Gabi Ashkenazi, also chief of staff of IDF. Getting a little trend over here. There's 3 out of the 4 fellows are former chiefs of staff of IDF. He was extremely popular in his time. And he had a little bit of a scandal before he left, but he was a popular, kind of very easy to relate to, just chief of staff of the IDF. He wasn't really dying to get into politics, but they kind of invited him on and offered him, high up position in the party to help them take over, and he joined. Then obviously they all have a bunch of other members of the party, but those are what they call the quartet, the four main guys in the party. They, all their billboards had them 4, and it's sort of them challenging Bibi. And the idea was, and at least somewhat successfully, Bibi kind of has a reputation of understanding matters of security, and they were going to say, we have so much security expertise here that you don't, generally the right is considered, the tough guys that understand security, and people were scared to allow the left to take power because of security reasons. So the campaign here was, we have 3 chief of staff of the IDF. You don't have to worry about us. We're just as badass as him. They were actually running campaigns with how many people the IDF killed in Gaza under Gantz's leadership. And we're just as tough as that guy, but we're smart about it, kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, because this is actually the next question I wanted to ask you is, so, you have Netanyahu, I guess, who just referring for U.S. audience would be on the right wing, and then this maybe being a little bit more like centrist or left centrist party. So, does the opposition and do, these people as maybe being fearful of, looking weak and being on the left. So are they like a bunch of Hillary Clintons who, actually are just full on with the war policy and at times even more hawkish, because of that? Or, do they take their, IDF credentials and approach it like a Tulsi Gabbard who says, I've seen the war and I know that's why we shouldn't fight it. And I guess, is there a real difference between either of these, Likud and Netanyahu or, Bloom, White, overall on like the foreign policy issues or on the Palestine issue? Is there a meaningful difference between the two?
So you're definitely not going to see anything anti-war coming from any of them. But during the three non-Likud terms of since 1977, where someone other than Likud held power, that would be Yitzhak Rabin, who was also a big military guy, and he went and made the Oslo Accords. But he was not a peacenik. I mean, it's kind of an image that he has today. But he, like, in the debate versus Yitzhak Shamir, when he won the election in 1992, the closing statements, they ask him, like, Shamir says, you're going to make a Palestinian state. He says, no way in hell am I going to make a Palestinian state. I just don't want to leave them around and be citizens, so I'm going to give them a semi-autonomous situation. That way we don't have to deal with them. And then when he founded the Palestinian Authority, he said, we kind of can only get away with some level of human rights abuse, but we're gonna put Arafat in charge. He's gonna be our thing, and he said he's gonna deal with them without human rights organizations and without high courts. So he was not exactly a peacenik, but he was sort of willing to deal somewhat and to kind of address it. And then the other non-Likud term was Ed Barak, who kind of seemed a little more interested in dealing, but again also invaded Lebanon and like wasn't exactly a peacenik either. Both were chiefs of the IDF. There was one other prime ministership was Ariel Sharon, who was elected as Likud, but then he decided to disengage from Gaza, meaning he pulled the settlers and the military out of Gaza, and then when he did that, he switched out of Likud, founded his own party, won re-election, what was considered a center party, and then he had a stroke and got like knocked out of commission, and his deputy took over, but his deputy got caught in all kinds of corruption and lost the next election. So there were three non-Likud prime ministerships since 1977. Everything else has been Likud straight through. Their policy has been more or less buy time. Don't concede anything, and don't be scared to use the military to mess shit up. It's more or less. Now, as far as the blue and white guys, it's a mix. It's a mixed bag. Like Boogie Alon, I think I went into how he thinks about security. But in Gantz, we don't really know, but we do know that he was in charge of the IDF during the last Gaza war, where they really messed a lot of shit up. And then same for Gabi Ashkenazi. Yair Lapid, I don't think even claims to really know what he's doing. He says he's going to deal. He's going to try to make a deal. But if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen, and he's kind of cool with that. I guess that's so. How we could if they do win, we're definitely not going to see anything great. But it is possible that we'll see like another round of talks, which probably won't go anywhere.
All right, so there's no, the opposition isn't, like, oh, we're gonna find some kind of two-state solution here or give equal rights to the Palestinians. Something that's not what anybody's running on here, and so, just I guess in a sense, it's not like a good versus evil situation or anything like that we're looking at.
They're talking somewhat about the two-state solution, but everybody in Israel knows that the two-state solution is dead, and most people in Palestine too. It's pretty clearly dead. It's back to the drawing board at this point. some like 10% of Israeli Jews live over the Green Line. And any two-state solution would require, like even Sharon, who was considered an absolute bulldozer, he was able to do whatever he wanted. Really, he was tough. He was a war hero. He didn't care about anything. He was as tough as they come. His disengagement, I think, between 8 and 10,000 settlers lost their homes in his disengagement. You're talking about 1,000 families, more or less, massive families. He was able. That was considered a traumatic national event. There's museums to this event. It was insane. It's considered like one of the biggest events in the last century, and it's not something that they would do lightly. But if you think for a second, like Ma'ale Adumim, which in order to give East Jerusalem any real Palestinian independence, Ma'ale Adumim is flanked to its east. Ma'ale Adumim is 50,000 people. There are plenty of places in the West Bank which are way bigger than all 21 settlements in the Gaza Strip combined. Quite a few of them. There's places near Ramallah. Beit El is way bigger than the entire Gaza settlements. Near Shechem, Nablus, there's 4 very large settlements, a lot of medium-sized settlements. Near Hebron, there's a significant settlement, Kiryat Arba. It's the two-state solution in the sense of a true separation is dead, has been dead for quite a while. East Jerusalem is like 250,000 Jews.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes sense. And, on the show in the past, I've talked about how, a one-state solution with equal rights seems to be the least complicated path. That'd be interesting and complicated, but you have?
On Libertarian Institute of Alternative Solution that kind of came up recently. What they call two states, one homeland, which basically is 2 states, but they share borders, share geographic location.
Okay, yeah, I'll make sure to link to that in the show notes page as well. I got more stuff on this Colonel election that I really want to talk to you about, though, about to get too caught up in the other stuff. Netanyahu corruption charges. We don't have to get into all the details and everything like that, but is it serious? Do you think it's impacting the election? And is there any chance this guy goes to jail? Just, I guess, me being a U.S. libertarian, I think it's kind of a joke to think that any, like George Bush would ever go to jail for war crimes, or Donald Trump or Barack Obama would go to jail for war crimes, or, even anything corrupt they do. I think it's pretty unlikely that even if Donald Trump did something like fairly corrupt, like, try to leverage some aid against the Chinese to get, Ivanka's company some kind of benefit in China. Not that that's an actual accusation or anything. I'm just saying, if there was a crime to that level, I still don't think Donald Trump would go to jail. But maybe things are different in Israel, so I'm just kind of curious as to, do you think a former leader could be jailed?
Well, there already has been a prime minister in jail, a president, and quite a few high political positions have ended up in prison. Ehud Olmert was the guy that took over for Ariel Sharon when he stroked out, and he ended up in prison for like a year and a half. There have been former ministers, a former president went away for rape charges, Moshe Katsav. There have been a couple interior ministers went away for corruption charges. Going away for corruption is something that happens there, mostly because the judicial system is stronger than the politicians there, whereas here the judicial system is kind of weaker. So, like, as far as that wouldn't be a problem. He can definitely go away. The thing is, the charges aren't really that serious. Like, with Ed Olmert, he was taking envelopes stuffed with money to get he was the mayor of Jerusalem, and, like, if you wanted to get a building project approved, you had to hand him an envelope full of cash. It was, like, legit straight bribery. Whereas this is that he kind of told a company, a news company, that if they didn't have such negative coverage of him, then he could get Sheldon Adelson to stop propping up their company. It's sort of bribery, but it's not as blatant and extreme. Basically, Sheldon Adelson is running the largest newspaper in Israel as a freebie. What he did is he went in, he hired all of the best sports journalists and gossip journalists and all that stuff. And then for the political section, he just put a bunch of Netanyahu loyalists. And then on top of that, gave the paper out for free. So he sort of took over the newspaper industry overnight. Not overnight, but over just a few years. He edged out these newspapers that have been around since before the state. And basically, Netanyahu told the head of Yediot, which was the biggest newspaper in Israel, now got pushed to second, that if you guys weren't so nasty in your coverage of me, I could get Sheldon Adelson to close up shop. He's only doing this for politics. He doesn't actually want it. So there is enough. Like, I think there's enough to get a conviction, but I think, like, if he did lose and step away, then they probably let him plead out of it and get probation or something, because it's not a serious hardcore took envelopes of cash to get shit done.
Right, he's enough of a half step away from it that they could find a way to overlook it. So something that I've talked to you about before, but I want to get into more, is on the possibility of another election. But I think to understand why there would be another election, could you just kind of briefly explain, Israel has a parliamentary system, so about how many seats do you need to become prime minister, and kind of what role does the president play in getting the prime minister elected, or however you're going to describe it there?
All right, so I'll try to make this as clear as possible. There's Israel's legislative body is a 120 seat parliament known as the Knesset. Elections are held. You actually do not vote for a prime minister. You vote for only a party. It's the only thing you vote for. Parties present a list of 120 candidates, essentially a list. If they won 100% of the vote, what the Knesset would be. Every party presents a list. Everybody votes for a list, and then they divide it mostly proportionally. There's a little complicated math over there. Basically, as long as you get 3% of the vote, 3.75% of the vote, then you're in, and then the seats are divided proportionally. Because of that system, there's quite a few parties in Israel. We have Democrats and Republicans and maybe a few Libertarians and Greens. Currently in the Knesset, there are like 11 or 12 parties in just 120 seats. And it's kind of down from its peak in the 90s. And I believe 92 Knesset was just insane. There were no parties more than 50. Now, to become prime minister, you need to be able to come to the Knesset and say, hey, I want to be prime minister. These are going to be my ministers. Do you guys approve of us as the government? And you have to get a majority. You have to get a majority vote, much like passing a law, to say, yeah, we approve of you being prime minister. As well, at any time, the Knesset can fire you, essentially. At this point, actually, they could either dissolve itself, meaning they could call an election, or they can provide an alternative, but they can't knock out the government without providing an alternative candidate. Just kind of a change they made in the rules. But so you need to get 61, a majority. Well, you need to get a majority. Maybe we'll get to. If people abstain, then you can have a government with less than 61. But more or less, you need 61 members of Knesset to back you. In order to do that, generally, well, always the way it works is you need a coalition. So say Netanyahu has 32 seats, I believe. So if he were to form a government, he needs to get another 29, at least 29 other members of Knesset to be willing to support his government in exchange for usually ministership positions for the heads of their party, as well as some policy, some policies that they want to push. So in the last Knesset, a simple, typical Knesset, Netanyahu had 30 seats, which is considered a very significant victory, and he joined up with Naftali Bennett. His party gave him Minister of Justice, Minister of Education, as well as promised certain that I think that he'd never even discussed the option of giving up East Jerusalem, and a couple of his most important policy issues. Then he went to the the Haredim, the religious parties, and he said, "Hey, I'll dump a lot of money into your school systems, and I'll give you the health ministry as well as the some important Knesset positions, and you'll support me." And they went along with that. Then he went to Victor Lieberman, same thing. He had, I think, 67 seats. He had a nice, comfortable majority, and they had a simple functioning government. Generally, it breaks down into blocks of right or left. So in the last election, there was 67 seats in the right-wing bloc. So we knew right away, as soon as election night, Netanyahu has enough seats for a government. At some point, Avigdor Lieberman decided that he's kind of tired of working with the religious party. When he's in government as the religious parties, certain laws go into effect that he doesn't like. He's a secular, and Israel does not have a separation of church and state. And for some things, that comes out really annoying, such as marriage law goes through the religious authorities. There's no public transportation on the Sabbath, and things that he just really finds to be unacceptable. He decided in no way he is not going to agree to continue operating with the religious parties. So that broke the historic right-wing bloc, and we got left with, although he's right-wing, he's secular. He's not willing to sit with the religious parties, who are more religious than right-wing. Some of them are both. Some are religiously right-wing. So in the last election there was an impasse. The right bloc, the people that were willing to sit with what Netanyahu considers his natural partners, had like 57 seats, and then the left bloc had like 40-something seats, and then there was Avigdor Lieberman and the Arabs. The Arabs were they're not willing to support a government that's currently occupying the West Bank, and the Avigdor Lieberman, who wants a government, but he won't sit together with the religious parties, which compromise too much of Netanyahu's bloc for him to form a government with Lieberman without them. So we sort of reached an impasse. Nobody was able to get 61. So for the first time in Israel's history, they went for a second election. They said, all right, second election, we're going to settle it. We won't have a problem here. Problem is they got just about the same result. Some of the smaller parties which just missed the threshold, missed it. On the edges, there were minor changes in the formation of the blocks, but the blocks were pretty much the exact same. I mean, Lieberman grew by 2 or 3 seats. He took like 1 seat from the right and 1 seat from the left, and we reached the same point where there's 55 on the right, 40 something on the left. So it seems like the only option is a government of the center right and the center left, just the 2 big parties, Netanyahu's party, Likud, and the blue and white party. Lieberman would be more than glad to sit in such a government. He's made that very clear. That's what he wants, because that government wouldn't have any religious parties. They'd be able to do simple things like allow people of different religions to get married, or allow intermarriage, or allow people to get on a bus on Saturday, or shit like that, which can't be done as long as the religious parties are a significant force in the government. The problem is the entire center-left hates Netanyahu with a passion. They've been pretty open that it's a personal thing about Netanyahu. Like, if Netanyahu were to retire and a somewhat reasonable, in their eyes, person were to take over the Likud, they'd be open. They just consider Netanyahu corrupt, and frankly, they don't trust him. Whereas, if Netanyahu were to be primaried, let's say, and Gideon Sa'ar or Gilad Erdan take over, they'd be open. If Miri Regev were to win, okay, that's already going into the weeds of who then the rest of the bigwigs in Likud are. But it's a personal thing at this point. They're not willing. A lot of them are people who have personal issues with Netanyahu. As long as Netanyahu was in charge of Likud, they're not going to sit with him. So we really reached an impasse. Now the way Israel's election, so the way it works is after the election, everybody goes to the president, which is mostly a symbolic position. They come and they tell him, we want so and so to be prime minister. All 120 members of the Knesset come and they say we want so and so to be prime minister. Generally, someone gets a majority of the recommendations, and when someone does get a majority of the recommendations, the president just automatically gives them the mandate. Like, he gives them the right to attempt to form a government. So in a normal year, like last time, 67 members said we want to see Netanyahu form a government. So right away he gets it automatically. Technically, the president has to hand it to him, but the president doesn't have discretion. What happens now is he didn't get a majority. He only had 55 members that were willing to say they want him to be prime minister. So at that point, it's up to the president to decide who gets the mandate. The president was a lifelong Likud member back from when he was a child. He was in likely youth group. Though he is a personal political enemy of Netanyahu's, and he went party over person. Gave it to Netanyahu. Netanyahu attempted to make a government. He immediately had 55. He couldn't get those last 6 seats he needs. He waited the full 28 days. So the way it works is you get the mandate. Someone gets the mandate. They have 28 days to complete government. If within 28 days they complete government, they come back to the president. They say, "Hey, I have a government. This is who it is." The president sort of signs off. It's a formality, and then he goes to the Knesset, says, "This is my government." They vote for it. He gets a majority vote. The government is installed. If you have 28 days to make a coalition, if you don't get within 28 days, you can ask for an additional 14-day extension. And if the president, like if it looks like you have a government, you're just waiting on working out last-minute deals, he'll give you a 14-day extension. Usually they are given a 14-day extension. Like last time, the talks with Bennett went to the last minute. They got a 14-day extension. They did it then. They got the deal done in the final hours because it's Israel and everything has to be dramatic. But this time, he didn't even bother. The 28 days were up. He's like, all right, I'm not doing this. I can't get a coalition because Lieberman is not willing, so there's nothing to do. So by law, the president gives it to another member of the Knesset. He gave it to the guy who the next most likely to form a government. He gave it to Benny Gantz. Benny Gantz currently has the mandate, but in order to form a government, he needs to get he needs one of three things really. Either he needs to get everyone who isn't in the right bloc to be willing to sit in the government together, or at least vote in favor of a government, which is next to impossible because Avigdor Lieberman, which is hard right, even though he's secular, will not sit in a government together with the Arab parties. Many of Blue and White itself will not sit with the Arab parties, and the Arab parties, frankly, aren't willing to sit with a lot of them. And then his other option is to join to agree to a power sharing agreement with Netanyahu, and the third option, which is what he hopes to do, which I frankly don't think there's really any chance of happening, is try to get one of the religious parties, or both of the parties which are religious in nature, but not really right wing. They aren't ideologically right wing. They just line up the right wing because they're religious, and the right is more. The right was more willing to. The right is generally the more anti-religious sentiment, or even just the more liberal, like allow intermarriage legally sentiment. Usually came from the left, so generally the religious parties went on the right. So he's hoping to get the religious parties to agree to a government with him, thus allowing him to reach the magic number of 61. Frankly, I don't think that's going to happen. I think at this point it's pretty clear that it's not going to happen, and we're probably going to go to a third election. The only way I can see it being avoided at this point is an idea that came up the past few days. It doesn't look like it has support, but it's something which I can see happening. Is even though there isn't a majority to form a government, there is a majority that really doesn't like Netanyahu. And the idea would be that they'd pass a law, some sort of, fancy law, but designed to prevent him from being prime minister, to either bring in term limits or some sort of law about if you're under investigation, you can't be prime minister or something along those lines. Essentially a law to fire him. And then Likud would be forced to put somebody else in charge, and then they could make a unity government with, and then they could make a government with Likud just without Netanyahu. I thought this had a bigger chance when it first came up because it seems like everyone who doesn't like Netanyahu could get behind term limiting him, but it doesn't seem like it has the votes, which is pretty surprising, but it doesn't look like it has the votes. So we're probably headed for a third election, I'd say. And I don't think anything's going to change after that either.
All right, well, thanks for getting us all caught up on all of the, election stuff here because I haven't been following it closely enough, but your explanation of what's going on is pretty good. I guess, unfortunately, from my kind of point of view, there's not anybody in here who seems any more anti-war than anybody else, but understanding what, could happen with Netanyahu.
There are a few somewhat anti-war candidates. They just don't get any support.
Okay, yeah. No chance of being the leader, prime minister there. I did want to ask you one more question, though, and this was kind of about something that I'm noticing, at least in U.S. politics, that it seems Trump is far more supportive of Israel and makes it almost into a partisan issue, I think, and how over the top, he's kind of been with his support of Israel and, how well he gets along with Bibi Netanyahu. And of course, we've also, have heard the stories about Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, his family being very close with Netanyahu and him talking about giving up his room to Netanyahu when he was a kid. So, with all those ties, I think it is becoming more of a partisan issue, and it seems like, one of the interesting trends with the kind of current more what they call progressive Democrats we have, like Warren and Sanders, they're at least a little bit open to not policies that are anywhere near, I think, should be what, is the U.S. policy towards Israel, but, the Warren says, look at cutting, Israeli funding a little bit or something like that. So, do you see the same thing where it seems like Trump is making this a partisan issue, and is there any reaction or pushback to that in Israel? And I have seen, at least what people say online are billboards with Netanyahu shaking Trump's hand, and that's part of his election ads.
Yeah, so Netanyahu definitely leaned into his connections with the Republican Party, and with Trump specifically. In his last-ditch effort before the campaign, he said, hey, you got to re-elect me because I have this great relationship with Trump, and shit's about to go down on the international stage, and you really want somebody who Trump is comfortable with. He's openly used that. And then actually criticism of him from the so-called left has been that, hey, you're lining us up with the Republican Party, and that means we're going to lose support of the Democrats. This has been openly discussed in interviews and ads that Netanyahu is leaning into the Republican Party, which is going to hurt us in the long term, etc. So it definitely is something that is on the radar in Israel. I think even more so than in America. Well, definitely more so than in mainstream America, but probably even more so than in most foreign policy circles. Netanyahu is definitely leaning into his relationship with Trump, and yeah. Whereas Yair Lapid, especially Yair Lapid, being more of the journalist type, not the military guy, he's much more into he put quality diplomacy sort of as his strong point because he's a big talker, and he's discussed that he has good relationships with he hangs out in the Saban Forum, and he has good relationships with Chuck Schumer types, and he's very busy that Netanyahu is destroying our relationship with American Jewry is also a big issue, that they're losing support of American Jewry, and they noticed that. And they sort of that's been part of the campaign against Netanyahu by his political opponents, is that he's losing support of American Jewry because he's leaning into the Republican Party, and American Jews aren't into that.
Right.
It definitely is something that exists.
All right, Kalmen, thank you so much for coming on the show. Right now, as far as I've seen, if you publish work, it's at the Libertarian Institute. Of course, that's where you happen to find this show, as long as the daily news roundup that I write as well. So keep tabs on the Libertarian Institute. I don't think you're very active.
Another piece. Yeah, I'm not very active. I am working on another piece on the Temple Mount. More generalized, a little bit of the history, some of the political and religious stuff around it. It's one of the more complex issues. It's probably going to be a much longer, long-form article. Probably also going to be on the Libertarian Institute.
All right, well, awesome. I look forward to it, and thanks so much for coming on the show.
No problem. Thanks for having me.